if we have to speak about urban water, I think the most logical place to start is how much water do we all use? How much water do I use? And what do towns and cities actually plan for in terms of water consumption so that they can actually supply that water? So the national town planning norm says that if the city is covered by piped sewage, then the benchmark is around 135 liters per capita per day. But if there is no piped sewage and it's only on-site sanitation systems, meaning septic tanks or pit toilets, it's around 75 liters per capita per day. But in our designs, in the rural context, we say that 50 to 55 liters per capita per day is the benchmark. So we are actually designing inequity into our systems. We need to keep that in mind. While that's what the city plans to do, what actually happens on ground, however, can be very, very different. I'm sitting and talking in Bangalore. I've seen communities in Bangalore where there is a consumption up to 300 liters per capita per day, and small towns of around 30,000 people, town called Devanahalli on the outskirts of Bangalore of around 30,000 people, highly water scarce. There the consumption is around 50 liters per capita per day. So a very important question to ask is how much do we all use and what do we use it for? A very significant amount of the water that we use, we must remember, we are flushing it down the toilets. And in a city like Bangalore, that is finding its way to lakes, that is polluting water, that is polluting groundwater. So we must remember that all the water that we use, at least 80% of it, in the urban context, we are throwing out as dirty water. And we need to keep in mind that that dirty water is going to come back to bite us in one way or the other in the environmental sense. So I think in the urban context, all of us are used to opening a tap and consuming water. That's because we are pampered by what is called municipal supply of water. Every house ideally should have a connection. In reality, many houses get left out, many places get left out. But the most common idiom of imagination in terms of water for the urban citizen is the municipal supply and the tap water that comes out of the municipal supply. So in the big cities, we may pay a bill, which is a detailed bill. So I urge you to go and look at the bills that you pay and see how you pay for your water. In small towns, it's often a tax that's integrated into property tax for the water that they consume. But I think we shouldn't underestimate the importance of a bill. Can we learn something from the bill? And should the bill actually be telling the consumer a story? That's a question one wants to flag. So where do towns and cities get their water from? I'll begin with Bangalore as an example. Bangalore actually gets most significant source of water for Bangalore today is from the river Kaveri, which the state of Karnataka is fighting with the neighboring state of Tamil Nadu over. And this river is around 100 kilometers away from Bangalore and close to 500 meters below Bangalore. So we are actually going and taking water from a very far away river and we are pumping it all the way up. Bangalore is unique in the sense that it sits on a little hill. Of course, different towns and cities can have different sources. Many towns and cities are lucky enough to have a river source not very far from the town. But increasingly, towns and cities are moving towards multiple sources of water and not a single source of water. And that's because of many reasons, and we'll come back to that. So while we can go and pick water up from faraway rivers, or in luckier cases close by rivers, are there more local sources that we can look at? Again, as an example, Bangalore itself originally had thousands of lakes in the entire Bangalore district, but over time these lakes are either being dried up or are being thoroughly polluted, and we are not looking at them as sources of water. And that's a question that we need to ask ourselves, that as we go further and further away for our water sources, what are we doing to our local water sources? So local lakes, urban lakes can be a very important source of water. We should take care of them. The other very important local source that we often tend to forget about, and even the formal systems such as the municipal supply don't always plan for or consider very well is that of groundwater. And as soon as we say groundwater, all of us, of course, are familiar with the bore wells. Often visually, the bore well is nothing more than a pipe that sticks out of the ground. You really don't know what's happening inside. But increasingly, as municipal supply is not able to either give people as much water as they want or not give people water at all, especially when they are living on the outskirts of larger cities, then people start relying more and more on bore wells these days. But the bore wells are also drying up in many cities. Groundwater is not factored into planning, and we are quickly exhausting even our aquifers, and we don't have the thought process to really manage and understand groundwater itself. We need to keep that in mind. And it's important to look at the precursor of the bore well, a traditional source of water, the open well, and across India is dotted thousands and millions of open wells. Ours is an open well culture. The open well is nothing more than a hole in the ground, which is not too deep, up to 80, 100 feet deep are among the deeper wells. But these wells tap groundwater, which is much shallower. And traditionally, all our domestic needs, most of our irrigation needs was all taken care of by these wells. And unlike the bore well, the open well actually talks to you. If you look at the water levels in a well, they move up and down. You can actually visually see them. They move up and down as with summer and the monsoon, and they are giving you signals of which is a time of plenty and which is a time of scarcity, and how to organize your life so that we are responding to the cycles of rain and we are using water carefully. So our wells are very important. There were step wells historically, and the step wells were designed not only as sources of water, but also as ways to communicate to people on how to be sparing in the use of water and which is a time of plenty. So here we are. But if you today go and look at these wells in cities and towns, they are becoming garbage bins. We need to rethink that. We need to remind ourselves that they are pieces of heritage. They are pieces of education for us about water, and many wells are getting closed up and getting converted to real estate, and we need to question ourselves about that. So the sources of water for a city can be many. It can be surface water, which is coming from rivers which are close by or far by. It could be from local lakes. It could be from local groundwater, and we need to start thinking about all of them and not go in the direction which we have, where we are spoiling the local sources and going to faraway sources. And so now increasingly cities and towns are actually dependent on all kinds of sources of water. So there's the river that helps you, there's the lakes that help you, there's the groundwater that helps you. It gets to you in different ways. It gets through you through piped water, through tankers, through wells and bore wells that you yourself dig. And therefore the city and how water plays itself out in the city is becoming more and more complex. And what we also see along with the issue of water scarcity in the city are two other problems. One is that of urban flooding. So when there's rains, we are talking about a lot of flooding in the cities. We are talking about traffic jams. In fact, the rains is often a time to talk about floods instead of a time to talk about how to actually make use of this rain, the original source of all water, on how the city can manage water for itself and manage water for the future. What we also see in cities as a problem is that of pollution of water, because as I pointed out earlier, the water that we use gets out as dirty water. This gets into waterways, this gets into groundwater, this gets into lakes, this gets into rivers, and actually pollutes our sources of water. So we need to look at all three problems: water scarcity, water pollution, and urban flooding. And one very important way that we as citizens can contribute to all of that is to get that connect back with our rain and look at how it rains in our own towns and cities. For example, Bangalore is lucky to have two kind of rainy seasons. One is called a pre-monsoon and one is called the monsoon. The pre-monsoon is in April and May, and the monsoons are in August, September, October. Sometimes we are lucky to also have rains in November, December, because there's a depression in the Bay of Bengal and Chennai is getting its rains the time. But how does a city look at this rainfall? How does it kind of gear itself to say, I am now going to use this rainfall, store this water well for the future, and in the process also avoid floods? That's a question that towns, cities and citizens of towns and cities should ask themselves and see how they can respond to these problems. And so moving on now from those problems to what are the potential solutions and the role of citizens in these solutions. I think Bangalore has a lot to share with urban areas across India on that front. And two stories that I want to highlight. One is the story of a lake called the Kaikondaralli Lake. There are many other lakes like the Kaikondaralli Lake where citizens have come together, have protected the lake from being encroached, have worked with government agencies to ensure that small STPs are put up on the banks of the lakes. There are wetlands in the lake so that pollution of the lakes is mitigated, if not prevented. Encroachment of the lake doesn't happen. In the catchment of the lake, the drainage to the lake, the water canals to the lake is protected and not encroached upon. So there are positive stories of this that's happening in Bangalore. You can look up and you'll find a lot of videos and stories about this in Bangalore. This is where citizens have to play a very important role. Another set of solutions that perhaps Bangaloreans are demonstrating for urban cities across India, towns and cities across India, is how communities can participate in managing water. So here is a story. Look for it on the net. You can go to www.bengaluru.urbanwaters.in. You'll find a lot of this information, but there is a layout called Rainbow Drive, for example, which has done fantastic solid waste management in its community, but also has done a lot of interesting things to manage water in the community. It starts with controlling the demand, reducing people's demand. From around 250 liters per capita per day, they've reduced their demand to around 150, between 110 and 150 liters per capita per day. And they've done this by metering each household and having their own tariff and ensuring that the basic access to water, the lifeline need for water, is not expensive. But beyond that, people are really paying the real cost of water so that they get disincentivized to be wasteful. They've also dug a lot of recharge wells to capture the rain, to recharge groundwater so that their bore wells replenish, but also this whole recharging prevents floods. They've also invested in converting their wastewater, in treating it and reusing the wastewater, at least for gardening, and they're also sharing their treated wastewater with close by farmers who are in need of irrigation water. So 2 or 3 very important aspects this layout is demonstrating. It's showing how people can control their water use. It's showing how people can manage and recharge groundwater. It's showing people how wastewater can be reused. It's also showing people how solid waste ties up with all of this and how solid waste needs to be managed so that the rainwater that falls doesn't get contaminated. So this is a capture of the fascinating stories of both the problems of urban water, but also the solutions and how citizens can be a part of the solutions. A lot more information is available with case studies, with concepts explained, with guides on www.bengaluru.urbanwaters.in. Please go there and refer to it. Thanks.